listen to social workers on their experiences with policing, and to generate ideas on how to stop police violence, brutality, and racism. These ideas might range from practice and methods to policy and legislation. Today's conversation will begin with presentations from social workers and policy experts on policing, their experiences, and how they think we can solve this problem, or at least work towards solving this problem. There are no limits on ideas. And again, some of them range from training on implicit bias to abolishing police departments and starting all over again. Because policing, by and large, is a function of local jurisdictions, NASW is an organization uniquely qualified to take on this discussion. Its structure is both national, it's state, and local, with its members and leaders at every level. Social workers are trained in community organization and political action. With this training, they listen, they engage, and they advocate at all these levels. As a national and state organization, NASW has held and will hold many events such as this one today throughout the country. I'd like to thank NASW staff, in particular Jolene Hui and Rebecca Gonzalez, for helping organize this event. I'd like to also thank our leadership, our NASW board members and other leaders who support this event and others that we have organized. Now I'd like to ask our chapter president, Dr. Sylvester Bowie, as well as our chapter first vice president, Dr. Joseph Nunn, to say a few words. Dr. Bowie.
Thank you, Jan Lee. It is a great privilege and a pleasure to just say welcome to this group. And we are tackling an issue that is a very critical one at this time in our history, the relationship between law enforcement. And I'm always mindful of the idea that the police is there to serve and to protect. And yet it seems as if for a lot of communities, and especially Black communities, the perception is that there's a war. And when we see, for example, how law enforcement have been militarized over time, the idea that people get in their minds is that there are opposing forces. And when you're at war, then the opposite party is the enemy, and you must destroy or get rid of the enemy. And I hope this discussion will take us in a direction where we can recapture the idea of to serve and to protect, where the relationship between law enforcement and our local communities is as intended to be. You know, I'm retiring next month, and when I tell some of my friends that I'm retiring, the response I get is that you're too young to do that. Are you sure you're old enough to retire? So it kind of drives me to think about what I want to do with the next phase of my life. And one of the things, I'm a certified mediator, and I'm beginning to see more and more the need for that role. And I hope some of the conversation that we'll have today will be about how, as social workers, we can mediate our role between law enforcement and our communities, because there's a long history of our communities suffering at the hand of law enforcement, and we hope that will change that trajectory, will change that perception, and will change that reality. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I hope that by the end, this would have been meaningful and productive. And so once again, welcome to all that are here. And I know we have some non-social workers, and I'm especially looking forward to hearing from some of these personnel as they speak to the issue at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bowie. Dr. Nunn. Well, I did see.
He's muted. He's muted.
Okay.
Joe, you need to unmute. You need to unmute, Joe.
There you go.
All right, let me try one more time. Being an old guy, way back when in junior high school, I remember a group of us getting together and picking aliases that we would use when we got stopped by the police. We knew it was a part of our lives. We expected it. I picked the name Gerald Saunders. Still remember it. I don't know where that came from, but we knew that that was a part of our lives, and we understood the risk. It's unfortunate, and it feels very, very stressful to know way into the future in this time, we're still dealing with the same issue. Somehow we've got to shift the culture of the police departments. I don't think about getting rid of them, but somehow we have to get them to behave and begin to think differently in terms of how they do things. When I served on the Interagency Gang Task Force in Los Angeles, they talked about approaching the issue of gangs and delinquency on 3 levels: prevention, intervention, and suppression. Most of what everyone talked about, regardless of what group they came from, was suppression. We have to have more tools than that. Moving toward prevention, intervention, and some people also include re-entry among that set. We got to begin to think differently about how we allocate our resources and the kinds of interventions that we developed to deal with some of the issues that we're confronting.
Thank you, Dr. Nunn. Now I'd like to introduce the speakers for today. They will speak, each of them will speak about their experiences and their ideas. And after they speak, then we'll have a open forum, a question and answer session. And Jolene Hui will be managing that question and answer session. Now, I'll name the speakers, and then I'm asking the speakers to do a brief introduction on their background, their experiences, and their interests so that we can get to know them a little bit. So the speakers today are Dr. Rosemary Alamo, who was just recently on our board of directors. She's a professor at USC. She's an excellent resource, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her work, particularly with police forces. Then we'll have Rick Ornelas, who also is a clinical associate professor, and he's also done a lot of work with police forces. I've asked a longtime member of NASW, Hassani Go, to talk about her experiences. And when I first met Hassani many, many years ago, she used to tell me about how she would go on ride-alongs with law enforcement in LA County. So I think her background and experience would be really valuable from a direct practice standpoint. We also have Elizabeth Henderson, who's with the LA County Psychiatric Mobile Response Team. And again, this is kind of more the official governmental response to how we try to match up people with people who have mental illness or behavioral health problems, and how we try to work with them around a team. And then finally, a late addition, which I'm very happy to have suggested by our chapter president, Dr. Ernest Uwazi, who's the chair of the Sacramento State Criminal Justice Department. So with that, I'll ask Dr. Rosemary Alamo to start. Thank you, Dr. Alamo.
Thank you so much, Jan Lee, Dr. Nunn, and Dr. Bowie, and Jolene, and esteemed colleagues. And thank you for having me this afternoon with you, and allowing me the opportunity to share a little bit of what my work has been like in this area. So basically, across the 20 plus years of experience in social work, I have been able to work in the public child welfare, school settings, nonprofit, private practice, and really in a range of different settings and positions, along with now academia. So as a licensed clinical social worker and also an associate professor with the USC Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work, which I've been at for the past 9 years. I have had the opportunity now to co-lead a public safety initiative with my colleague and partner, who you will also hear from, Professor Rick Ornelas. And so basically, this public safety initiative is a collaboration, again, with our school and a number of law enforcement agencies. And it has facilitated and promoted smart decarceration, as well as looking at the preventative, as Dr. Nunn beautifully mentioned as well, the areas of focus. So looking at prevention and intervention, and looking at ways as to how social work can be in a very active role and collaborate with law enforcement. So through now, it's actually, we just completed the 4 years of this public safety initiative. We're about to enter now our 5th year. And so basically, we've been able to create these relationships and partnerships with numerous law enforcement agencies. So we have, as partners, we have Gardena Police Department, we have Los Angeles Police Department, we have our Fontana Unified School District Police Department, we have our own USC Department of Public Safety, as well as Santa Monica Police Department. And so basically, these are law enforcement agencies that have been able to come to us and say, we need help, we need your support, we need what social workers can help us address, because they realize and acknowledge that there's numerous areas, specifically as it relates to social services, where the need is there, and they do not have the ability nor their skills to be able to tackle that, because that's not what they were trained for. And they are the first to be able to attest to that. So basically, we have these interns that have been able to work in collaboration with these various law enforcement agencies to be able to provide direct services to the youth out at Promise Youth and families and communities where these law enforcement agencies are at, and help provide direct services, providing that individual, that family, that group counseling, also looking at crisis intervention, looking at how they can support with the resources. So instead of referring out these clients, they're able to see them within, or the clients are not having to wait on a waiting list, right? So basically, you have that direct service being provided. And along with that, there's also the macro skills, right? So basically, our interns have been able to support with the development of policy and procedures to be able to have a social work role and responsibilities captured within these departments. And again, the services will vary from micro, macro, and meso. And in many of them, they're basically doing all three. So it's an opportunity to influence and impact a culture, the culture that we're coming in. And again, yes, as hosts, we are guests, as we are in many other settings. And we are in this setting because, again, these are agencies that have asked us to come in and support. Just like we have other settings that are asking us for support, we've been doing that with our interns. And so now I think we're getting close. We actually had about close to 80 interns that have gone through these departments across these 4 years. And many of them are coming back and helping, serving as preceptors, again, continuing to influence the culture supporting the communities, and also being of influence in how law enforcement is doing their work. Having always very present our NASW Code of Ethics. So my colleague will speak further, Professor Ornelas, about the trainings and all other services that are provided under this initiative. But that's just to provide you with a little glimpse of it.
You're muted, Jan Lee. You're on mute.
Thank you, Dr. Alamo. Next speaker, Dr. Ornelas.
Unmute.
Dr. Ornelas, you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Mute yourself. Mute yourself. How's this? Okay, thank you. Is there an echo?
Yes.
Turn your volume down and mute yourself. Okay. Thank you. While I'm not a doctor quite yet, how's this? Is this better? My apologies. Well, thank you for the title of doctor. I'm not quite there. I am pursuing my doctorate in behavioral health from Arizona State University, and I anticipate completing and defending December of this year. So thank you. Thank you for the good wishes, and I appreciate the title. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you and amongst social workers and others in the field that are looking to reimagine, reform, and change the way law enforcement does its work. So a little bit about me. I am also a clinical associate professor at the USC Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work. Prior to USC, I was in law enforcement for over 21 years. I retired as a sergeant from the Los Angeles School Police Department. Since my retirement, I continue my service to law enforcement as a social change agent, specifically in areas of mental health for law enforcement, training for law enforcement on how to build strong and nurturing relationships with the community, as well as leadership for law enforcement. And this is under the umbrella of the California Peace Officer Standards and Training, which is the governing body for all law enforcement training across California. So that means that they approve, certify, oversee any trainings and/or policies or best practices for law enforcement in the state. So to continue what my colleague Rosemary touched on in terms of our public safety and social work initiative, is that as part of our initiative, our students, to include law enforcement and professional staff, receive intensive, ongoing, comprehensive training in a number of areas. And it's along just a spectrum of evidence-based practices, from motivational interviewing, problem-solving therapy, CBT, as well as child psychology, law enforcement ethics, expressive arts, to name a few. And these trainings occur bi-monthly, and it brings all of these different disciplines together so that, one, they can share their common experiences. Each brings their own talents, gifts, experiences, knowledge, skills, and abilities, so that each discipline comes together and we can look at healing and addressing community issues holistically using multidisciplinary approaches. In addition to that, our school has also taken charge in moving forward in helping reimagine and or reforming the way law enforcement does its work. We all know that due to the recent incidents across the nation, that there is a need for long-lasting collaborative relationships between public safety and the community, and social work is sitting at the center of this. So we have taken charge in supporting comprehensive and inclusive community-based initiatives and identifying best practices to address the core issues impacting communities. And we know that the scope of law enforcement responsibility has expanded. And we know that law enforcement has become the de facto first responders to many social services issues, to include non-crime related issues. So law enforcement must be prepared to deal with these issues effectively. So today's era really calls for law enforcement to develop the skills, knowledge, abilities through higher education, career development, and comprehensive and ongoing training programs to include policy change, best practices, protocols. And there's a number of ways of how our public safety and law enforcement initiative will help in meeting this need. Leadership development is one. We know that in order to effectively change culture, people's values, beliefs, loyalties, we need strong leadership. And that is across all levels of the organization. So I'm talking about at the line level, officers being able to police each other, shoulder tap each other and say, that is not right. Strong supervision is also important. Having middle level management and or supervisors that are holding people accountable, and strong leadership at the top where they model the way, where they have a strong tenets of treating people with dignity and respect, giving them voice, being transparent, and doing what's best for the community. Now, we've touched on a number of the evidence-based practices that we're infusing into law enforcement practices. So we're also looking at how to introduce trauma-informed approaches, because we know that there's historical trauma. We know that law enforcement, by nature of its position within the system and historically, has been part of the trauma that is impacted communities, especially communities of color. We're also looking at how can we integrate social work practices into community policing. What does that look like? Law enforcement should be the fabric of the community. We often think of this thin blue line, us versus them, but that's not what the thin blue line represents. The thin blue line represents we are all together. Law enforcement is a fabric of the community, and we work collectively, inclusively, collaboratively to develop, plan, implement programs, initiatives, so that we all heal together. It's important also for officers to have interpersonal skills. How do we communicate across different disciplines? How do we talk to people? How do we speak with people in a way that speaks to their hearts and mind with dignity and respect? It's also important that law enforcement further learns bias awareness, implicit bias and explicit bias, what the historical context is of that, and then how we can move forward so that there's some self-reflection on where law enforcement fits within the larger system so that we can move forward. And ultimately, our goal is how can we develop practices so that social workers, law enforcement, and other disciplines are working together with the community to build and enhance trust. Those are a number of the initiatives that we're looking to move forward through our school. And as I mentioned earlier, the national conversation is ripe. It is time for some change, and social work is at the center, is at the core. And we have the opportunity now to do some meaningful work to change how law enforcement does its work and how we can help communities heal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nellis. Now I'm going to ask Hassani to tell us what it's really like on the streets.
Thank you again, Lee. I'm a graduate of SC, 1986. I graduated, and just to give students hope, if you're single out there, I found my partner in the process. I started out in the world of police because my father was a cop. He was Metropolitan Police Department, Washington, D.C. And at the time that he joined the department, being a Black man, he was only allowed to arrest Black people. In fact, his first assignment, they put him in a toll booth, and there was no heat and no air conditioning. If you've ever been to D.C., you know that's a problem. He eventually got to the point where he was able to arrest anybody, but that took a lot of years for him to get to that point. Because of my experience with police, a lot of my uncles were police officers, and Uncle Jim and Uncle Cheeks, and because of my experience with them, I never understood that there was any problem between people of color and law enforcement. And it wasn't until I was in the 1960s when I met Malcolm X and first understood that that there could be a problem. First time I was stopped by a police officer for a faulty headlight, I froze. I absolutely froze. And didn't after he left, and he saw that it was a faulty headlight switch, and so he left without giving me a ticket or a warning or anything, and I forgot how to drive. I was so terrified. Years later, my partner and I decided to have kids, and our first son was born. And I realized that this little Black person I was gonna have to have the talk with him at some point. And 2.5 years later, his brother was born, and I knew that that there were issues, and I wasn't sure how to deal with them besides the talk. But I decided that being involved with the local police department might be a way to try to mediate some of that. I would get to know the officers and they would get to know me. So I joined the Citizens Academy, which I actually enjoyed. I had a really good time with that. And started to get to know officers. I decided that I would do ride-alongs at least once a month so that I could see what they were dealing with. And got really familiar with the city that way and with the issues that were there. So my experiences personally were not too bad, except freezing. I had one experience where a police officer stopped me, and again it was a tail light this time, not a headlight, and I had been taught to get out of the car. I got out of the car and both of the officers dropped back behind their doors and pulled their weapons on me, at which point I froze in place, and it turned out okay. They did put me in the back of the car, which I'm not sure if that helped or not, because the back seat of the police car was filled with beer cans, and I still don't understand that. But anyway, I left that incident without without too much trauma. After I finished with the academy, I decided to start volunteering and became a part of their youth accountability board, and which again gave me more information about my community and more experience working with various officers. I decided that this was a good thing. When my son reached fourth grade, our older son, the school district became more difficult for kids of color, and so we moved to another city. I responded to that by joining that Citizens Academy so that I could become familiar. And during that time, I was able twice to intervene in situations where young people were being challenged by or about to be arrested by police, and was able to clarify what was going on and for them to take a step back and de-escalate the situation. So my experience, I have to say also that part of my experience is that in 1978 in Texas, I was arrested for marijuana. I was harassed by the officers during that time, but what it did was it sent me to a drug abuse program. And the drug abuse program eventually led me to decide to go back to school and get back and go to USC. And I think that about covers the experiences that I've had. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassani. I'm sure we might have some additional questions for you. Now I'm going to ask Elizabeth Henderson, who's with LA County, to say something.
Hello, everyone. I just want to thank you for having me and this important discussion to bring me to the table because I am on the ground. LA County Psychiatric Mobile Response Team is the county's response to mental health crisis on the ground. So we respond to schools, hospitals, houses, anywhere where someone is having a mental health crisis. And we're able to assess them, see if they need to be placed in a psychiatric facility and facilitate that, or link them to other mental health services. Now, being in crisis work, it does turn bad quickly, but that's also not often. And when it does, we are able to call on law enforcement to come be our backup. But for the most part, for our jobs, we are able to go into homes pre-COVID. We are able to assess people and get them to the hospital or get their crisis subsided pretty easily without any other intervention or police force needed. So I see the benefit in collaborating with law enforcement. There are some teams out there who are a mental health professional with a police officer that do respond to more calls that involve weapons or calls that may be a little bit more dangerous. And I think collaborating with law enforcement is very important for social work. At the same time, it's important for us not to become part of law enforcement. I see that it's kind of hard to maintain a social worker in a position where they are working exactly with a law enforcement officer. So if they're in the car with them all day long for a 12-hour shift, I mean, that's not something that a social worker necessarily signed up for. So I think if we can kind of separate ourselves and just be collaborative. So if dispatch gets a call and law enforcement's like, let's have social work also respond with us and meet us there, I think that's a better model for us moving forward than to have social workers actually with law enforcement in their departments. It keeps us separated. I mean, law enforcement doesn't want to do our job and we don't want to do their job. Let's not put us together. Let us do each what we're trained for. And I think that would be a better step moving forward. As far as accountability goes, I think that social workers should be pushing for more outside, like a citizens advisory board, so that there is a law enforcement agent, there's a social worker, there's other disciplines on a board that are able to review some of the citizens' concerns and able to address it in real time. So I think we can be pushing for that wherever we are at the local government, from local to state government, that we can have in our cities. We can have an advisory board where we're able to, in real time, kind of checks and balances. We had this complaint from a citizen and we can review. Now we have recordings and we can take from everybody's perspective and decide what to do moving forward and how to handle that. I feel like that's a better approach to kind of handle things right now, because people are demanding change now. We don't have necessarily exactly the time to figure things out, but if we have a collaborative approach to people feel like if they call and they make a complaint, it's actually going to be heard, not just by the police themselves, but it's going to be heard by other people who have their interests and their rights in mind as well. And the last thing, as far as police training goes, I think what social work does really well is we have community immersion. And I feel like we can do that with law enforcement. If social workers get together and create a community immersion program for law enforcement, to where it only takes 1 or 2 days, but you have the officers and you have a social worker with an officer that helps those new coming officers go into the community, talk to families who have had interactions with law enforcement, kind of get that feedback, get everybody in. It's not a training, they're actually out there, they're talking to people, real faces, they're learning the community that they're about to go in. And that is something that I think will be very, very beneficial in the short term and in the long term, with creating a better relationship with police officers and with social workers, also collaboratively working together, helping them see things in a different light. I think a lot of times social workers bend over backwards to try and see things from law enforcement perspective, putting ourselves, volunteering with them, but we need to actually have them come over to our side too and see what we do and how they can benefit from thinking of things from our perspective as well.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Ernest Uwazi, last minute addition, but very welcome, to unmute himself and then tell us a little bit about your work, about yourself, and kind of your perspective on this.
Thank you very much, our colleagues in the helping profession, advancing justice, and Dr. Bowie for bringing this to my attention. Although very close to this meeting, I've been enjoying the discussions and oftentimes learn a lot from these discussions than anything I may be able to share, because we're really in a conversation and listening mode for those of us, especially at the heart of criminal justice. In our division of criminal justice at California State University, the second largest criminal justice program in the country and department on campus, with over 1,800 students. Most of them, when they graduate, about 1/3 of them go into law enforcement, police, sheriff, California Highway Patrol, FBI, and some go into international organizations or private investigations, so on and so forth. So the issue of policing is really at the heart of our work and our curriculum. And I've been on the campus in the department for over 29 years, and I have seen the improvement. I teach one of the courses I regularly taught before becoming chair is minorities and criminal justice and police and community relations. And one of them is a GE course. The first one is a GE course. And I had revised it when I came on board, along with the one about community and the justice system. What are some of the areas of tension? I also teach a GE course, even as chair. I continue to teach that course on restorative justice and conflict resolution, where in all the courses, definitely issues of police engagement or police-community relationship is at the heart of them, especially with regard to minority groups. we are very committed to social justice, and that's one of the things we reflected in our strategic plan a few years ago. Those of us that are very conscious of these issues made sure that we reflected that in revising our mission. That we're looking at preparing students who go in as criminal justice practitioners or leaders with a sense of social justice, problem solving, who can act ethically, and very aware or sensitive to not just local, but also global communities and their intersections with justice as part of building their cultural competency. Now, of course, with the George Floyd case, which I wrote a statement as chair of the Division of Criminal Justice, we basically say we're going to be engaging in conversations to look at what we are doing, what we could do differently, what we're not doing that we should add to our curriculum, to our program and research. I look forward to engaging my faculty in our very first convocation when we come back, post-COVID convocation in August, in a very intentional, methodical way with our faculty and what that may look like. I know it's going to be a major endeavor, but one that I'm confident we will be able to address, to contribute in a way. I have also been, so that's pretty much about our curriculum. I'd be glad to engage in further discussions later. We do have, I would mention, about 5 years ago, we created what we call LEX, Law Enforcement Candidates Scholars Program, geared toward bringing in students who are from underrepresented groups or minorities as a way of getting them interested in law enforcement with MOU with the Sacramento City Police Department and California Highway Patrol. So those students, if they successfully go through the program after 2 years, it's a certificate program that is really embedded heavily in issues of social justice and cultural competency and multiculturalism and diversity and inclusion. If they successfully go through the program, they pretty much guaranteed employment with CHP or the Sacramento Police Department to go through their academy. And we have about 24 or so that have completed the program and been employed, either have graduated or from the academy or are still going through the academy at this point. So we see this definitely as one of our areas of engagement in producing or educating the future leaders in our criminal justice program. Certainly there is more to be done. Listen to the conversations about civilian oversight of law enforcement, and it's one that I'm also currently involved in a roundtable discussion with the mayor of Sacramento, along with many other people in the community. What may that look like? Currently, Sacramento City Police Department and Fire have oversight through the Office of Public Safety Accountability. The mayor has proposed, and most likely probably will be passed by the City Council of Sacramento, to bring in an Inspector General. Oakland has something similar. LA has something similar. Look forward to learning from those experiences what that may look like in terms of providing additional oversight of the police. He has also called, it's something that one of the things that kind of piqued my interest when Dr. Bowie mentioned this discussion about reimagining law enforcement. The mayor has proposed a department that will shift about 5 million currently, that could change, from police budget towards kind of a social service department, where if a call comes in that is an emergency call that has no underlying crime, that call would be routed to a group of professionals in social work, social service, and so on and so forth, to address. Of course, the devil is in details. And as I was listening to Elizabeth talk, could you need the police to oversee, just be there and be quiet, or come in only when something really, something is, bad is going to happen? Or do you bring them in at the end? Or the idea of having like a community immersion seems quite interesting as well. So these conversations are starting now, and I look forward to any document or reference that I'll be able to share and with the mayor and in my own circles with my colleagues as we move forward. So those are my quick thoughts for now. And again, thank you very much for sharing, and Dr. Bowie for letting me join you. Peace.
Thank you, Dr. Wazi. So now we're going to begin our kind of open forum conversation part of the program. Anyone who would like to make a comment, ask a question, please raise your hand. If you don't know how to do that, if you're using Zoom, if you clicked on the participants button at the bottom of your screen, you'll get a participants window opening up on the left or on the right of your screen. And at the bottom of the participants window, there's a feature that says raise hand. And you can click on that, and then we'll see your hand and we'll recognize you to speak. And you can ask questions or make comments. You can direct them at one of the panelists, several of the panelists, or all of the panelists. And then if you do that, we'll ask all the panelists to respond to it, or those who want to respond to it. So we're going to start now, and we're going to see if who has a question. Make sure you unmute your button, as I forgot to, and ask your question or make your comment.
Also, if you are uncomfortable speaking or you can't speak at this time, I'll monitor the chat box in case we have any questions come through there.
Okay, so I see that Dr. Wazi has a question.
I've been thank you, kind of curious on two fronts. One has to do with the role that the police play, their functions. As a criminal justice scholar, the literature suggests clearly that it has evolved over a period of time. You know, from one of law enforcement to other maintenance to social work. And if you ask the police department or officers, they would tell you, well, we are responding to the community. You know, the community would want us and they call us and expect us to play this role. So I'm kind of wondering how you would suggest engaging in a discussion with the community and the police. I think if you talk to the average police officer, they will say, we'll be glad to give up some of these things because we don't get good reputation away from our colleagues because we're kind of doing, you know, not the real police work to some extent, but we kind of do it because the community, and we're also saying the police are there for the community and they're supposed to do what the community expects them and wants and demands them to do. So if you are engaging in this discussion of how to let go and moderate that, manage that expectation, what type of framework and how would you see that or suggest that conversation? Any of the panelists can respond. I'm curious.
So this is open to anybody or particularly to the panelists. So please jump in.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I also welcome any experiences you may have had where you have this kind of transition or back and
You
forth.
want to share the details?
Yes. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Rosemary, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So thank you so much for that question. Again, this is just one perspective, and thinking that, again, this is a very complex issues that we have at hand. There is no one right way. There are a number of ways. There are like number of entry points. I think one of the key things is having that strengths-based approach and the collaboration. So whether it is through town hall meetings, opening up different venues to participate and be able to engage in expressing and sharing their voice, I think will definitely be very helpful. Again, this is an area where we as social workers can, we thrive. Again, connecting people, linking people together, facilitating conversations, facilitating dialogue as mediators, and along with all the other skills that we have. So that could be one way. Looking at, each community has its own culture as well. So what's going to work? What venues are already there available? And how can we tap into that before considering, reinventing additional venues? So what existing venues, platforms are currently in existence that one might be able to take advantage to engage the community and being part of the decision-making process? Again, we're social worker. As a social worker, we can be at the table, we can be in there in those conversations to help facilitate. Is one of the thoughts that come to mind. And again, this is one of many other possible alternatives and solutions.
I'll just say one thing, that when we go out to any call, we always inform the caller of their rights and their decisions. So we kind of are providing them the education that they need to make an informed decision about, what could possibly happen to their loved one. Is this really what they're asking for and looking for? I think too, training dispatchers, that 911 dispatchers, they also have that direct contact with the caller and the ability to educate them about, police response and what that's going to look like. And in the community, obviously, you can do more outreach to engage each community about what their concerns are and what they want the response from the police to look like. And that can be also an open conversation. But I think anyone that is directly in contact with the public, it's also our responsibility to be educating them and informing them of what their rights are and what the possible outcomes could be, and talking to them about what they think other solutions could be for their issues.
Thank you.
I wanted to comment. Am I there?
Yes.
I wanted to comment on the fact that there are so many different models out there for response. One response is the psychiatric evaluation, like Elizabeth is a part of, and which I found out recently, some officers don't even know that citizens go out on these calls without the police. Her response was, good luck getting people to go out on these calls. And there's also a CIT model that some police departments use. The last training I knew of was in San Jose, and the officers themselves go to this training. I believe it's either 4 or 5 days, and receive training around mental health issues and response, and sometimes are then a team within the department in itself. There are also in LA County, for instance, there's a team that does case finding, in the sense that they go out to the homeless encampments, the unhoused folks, and try to assess for needs, build relationships. The team that I'm most familiar with used to take water out and hand it out freely to people, and other things that they could get donated. The team that I was on, we were able to get T-shirts and tube socks donated that we could hand out to folks. On the team that I was on, which is the Hope team in Pasadena, we were first responders to calls. As such, I wore the vest that officers wear, and we responded to calls directly from the radio. No team went out ahead of us, and were responsible for whatever we thought was a mental health issue. We went out on one call, for instance, I think it was our very first call, in which we heard that there was a bank robbery. And normally you wouldn't think of a bank robbery as being a mental health call until the dispatcher added that the person who had committed the robbery had no gun, was using a manual wheelchair. So we decided there might be some mental health issues there. We went out, and sure enough, he was a consumer of services. And so we were able to sort of mediate the response that police had. Another response method is the one that SMART with LAPD and MET use with LA Sheriff's Department. And they're second responders. A black and white goes out and clears the scene, basically, checks it out and sees what's going on and determines whether or not mental health should be called. I myself like the case finding and the first responder one. The second responder one is difficult. In a county like, excuse me, Los Angeles, there would be a call that would go out at 4 o'clock and down in the Long Beach area. And we were stationed up in San Dimas. So by the time we got to the call, it was 2 hours later. Officers don't want to wait around that long. They want to get back on a call, but they can't as long as they're waiting for us to come. I don't know how else to do it in a county as large as Los Angeles. Maybe a combination of efforts. But I think that, again, like Rosemary was saying, different cities, different areas have different needs, and the response has to fit the needs. The PET teams by far respond to more calls than the police do. And I worked at Access right before I left the area and saw the level of calls that go out for psychiatric emergencies. And I think that police often don't understand that there are civilians on the front lines with the folks that we see every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
If I can jump in. Hi, my name is Maya Dinola. I am a forensic social worker. I've spent most of my career in high-level mitigation and then working with reentry. I wanted to just kind of address the question you were asking. I think all the suggestions that have come forth so far are interesting and important. Also, what I would say is this: we got to go back to the beginning, right? If we're going to engage communities, if we're going to engage law enforcement, if we're going to engage anyone and make any kind of change, we have to start at the beginning, and there has to be a truth telling about how these systems came into place to begin with, right? So the American justice system, or the American legal system, as a lot of us prefer to refer to it, is an adversarial system in its origin, and it's set up that way. I've spent many hours across the table from DAs and law enforcement trying to educate, trying to bring empathy, trying to incorporate systems theories and person and environment and biopsychosocials. And it's very hard to do that when you're working across from somebody who fundamentally seems to understand their job is being an adversary, that they are legally and ethically required to counter whatever the other side is saying. So it's very, very difficult to achieve justice in those situations. I don't blame DAs or law enforcement or anything like that. What I think is that they also need an education. We all need to understand how these systems came into place, and how do we dismantle something that in its origin wasn't particularly just, right? To me, and my orientation and the way that I've seen this work, I really lean into the world of restorative justice. And I think that that is a really powerful lens that we can start using as we try to have these conversations. And the premise in restorative justice is that there is a conversation in which the wrongs are acknowledged. And so, you know, we can look to a lot of restorative justice models, both here in the US. There's some amazing programs that operate within the system where quote unquote offenders and quote unquote victims, and oftentimes they are interchangeable in many areas of their lives, are able to come together. I've seen it operate. It is a powerful tool that we do have, and social workers are really well positioned to bring these kind of innovative ideas to the table, where we're not just using the existing systems, but we're trying to bring in new and different perspectives, and going all the way as far afield as the truth and justice kind of reconciliation processes that we've seen in other places in the world, like in South Africa, in Rwanda, those types of places where genocide has taken place. Many of the people that I work with that are system impacted, that have been through sometimes 40, 50, and in some cases over 60 years of incarceration, you know, are victimized by these systems. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that a lot of these communities that are impacted are not going to come to the table because they don't feel safe, right? So how do we create safety for these communities so that their voices can be heard? How do we create safety for the police officers and the DAs, right? So that they don't feel like we're just there to tell them that they're horrible people, right? So they also need a voice. To me, that all starts with us pushing forward this narrative where we tell the truth. We tell the truth about how this came to be. We recognize the mistakes were made, and we understand that the path forward means that we fundamentally change these systems, not by excluding people, but by finding a way for all the voices to come to the table. So just want to really put that forward as an idea. I would love to see some more conversation about restorative justice and how we use that lens to alter the current environment. So thank you for giving me a moment to speak.
Thank you, Maya. That was very good. I'm going to move on to the next person who raised their hand, and that's Alejandra. And then after Alejandra, we have Amanis and we have Dr. Joe Nunn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alejandra, she, her, hers. So I want to first thank Elizabeth for her point of making sure that we're very separate in who we are in social work. I think coming from social work, and I think this is why I'm bringing my point conversation. I don't know if it's part of what we're talking about, but you know, social workers, we already have such a negative stigma, right? And working with systems that are broken. So it's a very thin line that we're like traveling when it comes to like community policing and even having social work in the same like sentence. So I think my concern is that I've just been seeing a lot of like articles where I'm a firm believer, y'all, like that I love social work and I think we have all the answers. And I am that passionate person that will convince people to do social work. But at the same time, what I'm worried about is that we're getting thrown into systems that are already broken and we have like no protection whatsoever, right? Like even the city of LA, because I'm LA focused, like they're like, yes, DMH, yes, LASA, but then we don't have like a sort of title protection. So like, what is it going to be assured that these people that are then being these community mediators are going to be even skilled, right? And so if we're putting people that are not technically trained social workers in these systems, and then it fails, like we're going to be the ones to blame because people are going to think that we're social workers. So, and additionally, like, you know, these systems like DMH and LASA, like they're burning out social workers, like, and turning away people that are in the field. So like, how are we integrating not only like, yes, we have the solution, but like valuing our own profession into that as well, like integrating it. Because I think this is like a great platform where, yes, like you need us, but we also need certain things to ensure for the long run that we can continue to provide these solutions and be able to protect what our core social work is and our values and our ethics that we're founded on, right? So I don't know if it's a question, but I just don't know, like, and this is why I'm reaching out. Like, I would love to be part of something like that. Or is there any conversation around that so that we can integrate what's happening? because I would hate that we're falling into that stereotype that we're so hard trying to break. And now it's like, not only are we kid snatchers, but then now we're also the police, because that's what the community is going to see. Like when we're coming into homes, like we're not going to explain, hold up, I'm a social worker, I am not part of the police, but also like here I am with them. So like how are we helping heal our communities in that way?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alejandra. Next speaker is Amanise, and then Dr. Nunn after that.
Okay, so is anybody going to respond to her first, or do I just chime in? Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
Because I think this has come up in a discussion as well. I don't have too much to add to other than I agree with this concern, because this came up when I was talking, I think, with my ARD and one of our and also just putting like non-vetted social workers into these situations, new social workers into the situation with DCFS where a child dies. I mean, these are very difficult jobs that take skill, experience. I mean, we know how we all are very different in what we're doing, and this is a big accountability issue. So I agree with your sentiments, and I'm also concerned. Did anybody else? I don't want to take away the mic if we're going to.
You know, I might respond really quickly, Janley, if you don't mind. The governor has a new commission to look at all of this police issue, and I want to write a letter with the social work view, and so that's part of the reason for this call. I want to get some of this feedback. I really enjoyed, I definitely want to put something on restorative justice, and I might even ask you to, send me a paragraph or two. That would be awesome. But I also hear what you're saying about title protection, which actually I think you're talking a little more specifically about practice protection, because we want to make sure that the social workers are not only do we protect the title, but the jobs actually go to real social workers. And so I definitely think that's something that could be part of the conversation with the governor's task force. And thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, I have Dr. Nunn, and then after that, Dr. Bowie.
Oh, I had my question, if that's okay. That wasn't my question.
Okay.
My question is, how much are we looking at actual accountability for the training of law enforcement? Because I work with law enforcement. I've worked with them for over a decade. For people that don't know, in mental health. And as an intern and now as an employee with the county, I've been working with law enforcement. And, seeing how we are so accountable and they are so accountable, things like implicit bias training about a lot of what was mentioned with with restorative justice, but just understanding the framework of the system they are becoming a part of. And because since ultimately their actions have very lethal consequences and things have gone completely wrong, when have we, or are we discussing to a reevaluation of the training of high school? I mean, I talked to some of these people and they can't wait to get out there and start shooting. This is like literally a badge of honor for them to get out there and do deeds like this. Like when are we going to develop, or have we talked about developing something where just like we have to get our license to make sure that we are complying with a set of ethics? When are we going to, or have we considered reevaluating what we are allowing to be the police in our system? I'm just kind of curious where that is with the discussion. That's all come up. It's crucial.
Well, I can speak to some of the training that's happening here in California as it relates directly to law enforcement receiving training around implicit bias, explicit bias, systemic racism, and how to build trust with the community. I've been part of an initiative for the past 5 years that was launched by the Department of Justice to speak specifically to your point. And how is it that we're training law enforcement across the nation, but specifically here in California, around the very issues that have been brought up, to include Maya's point about how law enforcement historically has been part of the system that oppresses people, and how even today, why people might have these beliefs and feelings towards law enforcement. And we can go all the way back in history to the convict lease program, in which it was just a program that enslaved people and kept them into slavery. The Tulsa Riot Act, in which, again, cops were part of that as well. And then we look at the Jim Crow laws from 1876 through the 1960s and law enforcement's participation and role in that. So we touch on the historical context and trauma that law enforcement has caused by nature of the profession. And that's part of the self-reflection. Then we also move into how is it the law enforcement is making withdrawals or deposits into the community? Because we know that there are law enforcement officers out there that are making meaningful deposits. And we also know that we have those that unfortunately are the bad apples and give law enforcement a bad name. And George Floyd's death is one of those. And I was sick to my stomach. It hit me to my core, just like it hit all of you. I was disgusted. And there's no place for anyone in law enforcement that has the values or has the gall to do something like that. So while we've made some improvements, we know that there's a lot of work, plenty of work to do. I can tell you this, we were approached yesterday, we, meaning Rosemary and I in our school, by the Santa Monica Police Department. And they are looking at how systemic racism, how Santa Monica is part of the systemic racism. And they're asking us to facilitate conversations and mediations internally to see how they can reform in terms of how they view themselves, how they view themselves as their role as law enforcement, and how they interact with the community. That's the first phase. So we'll be launching 3 town halls specifically with the Santa Monica Police Department to bring in their family members, spouses, partners, significant others. And then we'll be moving to begin 4 small training / support groups to start allowing them to share their experiences and to hear their voices as well. And then we'll integrate the Santa Monica community as well. So that's one part. The other part, very, very quickly, is that our own USC Department of Public Safety asked us to help reform his agency, because he's finding that many of the calls for service that his officers are responding to are social services related or non-crime related. So he's asking us through USC to help build a program, best practices, protocols, where social workers are part of that response, so that the officers are not responding to those social services, because all of us acknowledge that there's less training. Cops may not have the knowledge, skills, or abilities to deal with some of the social services issues. The other piece that he's asking us for as well, which is important, is officer mental health. We know that there's a stigma around mental health, seeking services within law enforcement. They have the Superwoman, Superman concept. And if I may use this word, it's suck it up, right? And we know that if they suppress, that's going to leak out in a way that perhaps is not unhealthy. And it's going to leak out when they're not in control. So Chief Thomas has asked us to, how do we develop a wellness program so that his officers, his employees, professional staff, dispatchers are in a better place and centered, because we know that it informs the way that they interact with the community.
Thank you, Dr. Nunn. Dr. Nunn is next.
I know I sound like a broken record on this, but in part of going back in history, we need to look at ourselves as a profession as well when it comes to power, authority, and control. We see that in the police department very clearly, and we see the abuses. In a PowerPoint I used to use to discuss this topic, I had slides that said, if you're walking up the street toward the house and you see the blinds closed and the lights go out, they're not saying, oh boy, here comes the social worker. Social workers, we have to think, if we start thinking of ourselves as sort of the good guys without thinking about what we also do and setting limits for people, think about our ethical code about the right to self-determination. I worked in the probation department in LA County, and every client I had that was locked up, if he had the right to self-determination, he would leave, he wouldn't be locked up. There are limits to some of the things that we say we do that we don't necessarily really look at. When I was at UCLA, we used to take our students to Skid Row on walking tours. And some of the guides, they call them, actually one guy said, we're the docents. I still remember what Mike said to me. He had been homeless himself. He said, do you know what social workers mean when they say empowerment? I asked him what? He said, it means I can get you to do what I want you to do. So we're also a part of this whole continuum of control. And as we begin to look at ourselves, perhaps we can also do some modeling for law enforcement, how to go about that process. On the point that Rick made around mental health and the police officers. When I was a probation officer, they decided to have rookies or people in training, police officers, come and do ride-alongs with us. One of the guys that rode along with me, everywhere we went, he saw code violations, and he would recite them to me. That's a 4, 5, 6, da, 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 da. And we've been crossing the street in short shorts and a halter top. He said, oh yeah, that's almost a, and he gave a municipal code violation for it. But what another guy said though, that when he went into the academy, he and his wife stopped being invited to parties. Friends start isolating them. So there's a natural tendency then for police officers to draw in to themselves. I think the challenge for us as social workers is also reaching out to them and reaching into that sort of where they come together around self-protection and begin to open up the dialogue, as many of you have said already. And so we begin to sort of see where we have commonalities and also where the rough spots are that we need to work on.
Thank you. Dr. Bowie.
So I have 3 comments and then a question to Elizabeth. And 2 of my comments are shameless plugs. One is to encourage people to, again, read the piece that I wrote for NASW, especially my concluding part where I suggested that one of the things that we need to be contemplating is restorative justice. Because this system is broken and the attempt to repair, I think is gonna be a waste of time. I think it had to be dismantled and start anew. And we have to start with those truth telling. So that leads me to my second plug. Back in 1996, there was a book written by Fox Butterfield. It's called All God's Children. It's out of print, but you can get it on Amazon. It tells the story of the history of policing here and just gives you an unbelievable understanding of how we started to monetize and make policing big business. And, you know, one of the things we have to admit now is that the horse is already out of the barn and there's no getting it back in. Policing is big business. They have strong unions, good pay, good benefits, and people are not going to give that up without a fight. So the idea of abolishing is like a fool's dream, so to speak. We have to figure out how we dismantle the system and start again where it is about serving and protecting. But I was intrigued by Alejandra's question regarding our role. And I want to remind us that social workers, as Jonan like to say, are agents of social control in this system. And we have a reputation. You know, we were at the forefront of the sterilization of poor women in Puerto Rico, in South Carolina, in North Carolina. We as social workers went in, told these people to trust us, and that we are giving them good advice, yet we were telling them to get sterilized because that was the mandate of the government. So we have to be careful that we do not further tarnish our reputation by getting into areas that we will never be proud of the practice. And so my question then to Elizabeth is, what kind of support from higher ups is the training program that you are involved with getting? And so, for example, when there is budget increase in the department, do they increase the budget of the training effort that you're doing? Because that's usually a good sign of the level of support for what's being done. Thank you.
I don't think that there is any particular training or ongoing training that we receive. It's more, you know, you get in there, you learn from other people that are in the field. They did start one training for being able to recognize and assess for threat assessment. So that way we can tell more when we're in schools for like school shooters or other kind of threat assessments. But I definitely think across the board, there can always be room for more training. And as we're shifting budgets from police departments, you know, bringing in more social workers, more licensed social workers, not necessarily always utilizing interns for big roles, you know, having licensed social workers doing that work and having interns learn from them, and then eventually they can go into those spaces. But you know, because of tight budgets, we do utilize interns in ways that they need not to be used, and additional training. And I think more people on the forefront being used to tell our stories and being used to create these policies, because we're, you know, our higher ups haven't been in the field in decades, and it changes. And with meth and all of these other things, you know, my job changes daily. And if you're not in the field, you don't recognize all these little nuances that are making it more dangerous or making it, you know, just shifting that direction, and that we need training every couple of years just to keep up with what's going on.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more comments, and we do have 2 people to go. I'm going to ask Catherine Moore to unmute herself and make her comments or questions. And then also Hassani is going to be our last commenter or questioner. Thank you.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to bring up that I think social workers are needed in crisis response situations, but it is important that we have licensed social workers who know what they're doing, and not interns who are still in school and don't have all of the training. If these are the most high need crisis cases in our community, if I have a crisis and my mom is suicidal, I don't want an intern going in to help her. I want a licensed professional. So, you know, that I'm very passionate about that. And then also too, social workers are so burnt out, so overwhelmed. There's so much to do. And with these high crisis response, it's important that we have reasonable caseloads and that we feel supported, that we are emotionally supported, that we have a space so we can go to take care of our own mental health, just like professional athletes take care of their bodies. We also need to do a much better job of supporting the other social workers in these high needs, situations. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Hassani, you're the last one.
All right. I want to mention with the law enforcement mental health teams that at least when I was there, and Linda Boyd was in charge, that she did still go out on calls And mostly they were high profile type calls and very high risk calls. It was nice to have a boss that would do exactly what we were being asked to do. I also want to mention, in terms of restorative justice, a couple of authors that I've run across. There's a gentleman, Seth Stoughton, who is one of the people who's writing about principled policing. And I'm impressed. He's an associate professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law, and he's affiliated with their Rule of Law Collaborative. The other person I want to mention is Philip Stinson. I actually saw him on television being interviewed. Philip is JD, PhD, professor of criminal justice at Bowling Green State in Ohio. And he writes about the guardian versus the warrior in policing, which I find to be a very interesting concept in trying to retrain or reorient policing and reframe the model from which they work. So I just add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassani. If you could put those authors in the chat box for everyone, it would be appreciated. So I'm going to wrap up now. I want to thank everyone here for their comments, their contributions, their questions, their ideas. We didn't have enough time to really cover it all in depth. I have my own personal opinions. One of them is that if we're asked to do work, we need the resources to do those works. So when you say, okay, well, we'll take money from police forces and hire a bunch of social workers and put them out there, that's not enough. Those social workers need the tools, the resources to do their job. So whatever happens in this whole era of all this change that might happen or is going to happen, we social workers need to do a couple of things. One is to make sure that we have the resources in the budget. The second thing is to really, really adhere to the code of ethics. A lot of the things that are going on here now, people have put aside their code of ethics because they have a job or they need to keep their job, or they become part of the culture or the oppressive nature of where they work. And to fight against that, we really need to go back to our roots, our code of ethics. So I want to thank you all. This recording is going to be made available. I want to thank our board members, our chapter president, our first vice president, and a number of board members on this call, all the participants, all the panelists. And Jolene is going to put the recording on the call and then get the link. All of you will receive the link for that. So thank you very much for this session.
Thank you very much. This is actually being live on YouTube, and it will be on our YouTube channel, so I can share that link to our channel with you. But as I said, thank you again. We appreciate all of you. Thank you for joining us midday, and I hope you all have a safe and happy weekend and holiday. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.